As we've been mentioning, 4 bunker buster bombs were used, dropped from this B-1, precision-guided bombs, JDAMs, Joint Direct Attack Munitions, but the bunker buster variety, which means that they can delve deep into a building, get under where these bunkers are, and essentially explode down after they have penetrated through the earth to the lowest point. Rita mentioned that this particular building had an underground facility, and it was not clear, according to U.S. officials, whether the meeting was happening in the lowest level. But we can tell you that the crater that is left, according to U.S. officials, numerous sources, is extensive tonight. Again, we're talking dust, according to one defense official here. As we mentioned, that they have been operating under this urban combat air support system, where they have a number of fighter jets in the air over Baghdad 24/7. This particular bombing run was specific, based on time-sensitive intelligence, as we have been talking about, that this meeting was ongoing and that people on the ground firmly believe that Saddam Hussein and at least one of his sons were inside this building at the time it was taken out, and that's when they called in the B-1. Don't know the lag time between the time they had the intelligence and the time the strike actually took place, but we can tell you that people are on the ground now looking at that facility, U.S. troops and other U.S. personnel.
And of course, I just want to bring the viewers up to date that what they are seeing on the other side of the screen, Brett, is earlier tape of what we believe was the bombing that occurred tonight, in which Saddam and his 2 sons may have been. Brett, you talk about an underground facility. The palace has had the presidential palaces have a very sophisticated bunker system. Is it thought by the Defense Department tonight that that same sort of sophisticated bunker system was where he was tonight, underneath this residential area?
They're just not sure. A lot of this information coming from a number of different sources across the administration and the intelligence community, saying that in this particular building, which, as Rita mentioned, is in a residential area, it's not in an industrial complex at all or a military facility, essentially a home. But some of these places, many of them, Saddam Hussein's regime has built bunkers and cement structures underneath these buildings. This apparently was one of those, and whether they were down in that facility meeting is still unclear. What is clear is that nothing remains at that spot. We can tell you that underneath these palaces, U.S. troops are finding huge tunnels, interweaving tunnels that connect. Some of the tunnels from the airport, underneath the airport, actually travel a number of miles toward downtown. Some of those troops are going through those tunnels and underground facilities as we speak, trying to clear them out. So far, they have not found anything specific, but we understand that it is essentially a catacomb of tunnels and underground facilities all throughout Baghdad.
Brett, can you confirm what time, or do you have information in terms of what time Saddam and his 2 sons supposedly arrived at this home?
Afternoon, Baghdad time, and we understand the strike happened shortly after dark. Again, as far as the lag time between the intelligence coming in and when the strike was ordered, I do not know that yet. But we're getting more information from officials across the board, as you can imagine, as the night goes on here, and we'll continue to update you.
Can you give us any more information on the sources on the ground? Rita reports that it's 3 separate sources. Are those special ops, or are those Iraqis assisting us?
Can't give you any specifics on that. We know it was human intelligence involved, as well as Rita mentioned some of that eavesdropping as well. A number of different sources, we're told. Defense officials staying away from the intelligence side, saying that it developed from a number of different places. So not too specific on that front. As Rita and Carl Cameron have both reported, they felt pretty confident, U.S. officials did, that Saddam and at least one of his sons were in their meeting.
Brett, you've been at the Pentagon an awful long time reporting. What's the level of certainty that you're getting out of the Pentagon tonight that this story is a valid one, that indeed it was Saddam and his 2 sons?
There's hope Greta, and it's the similar hope that they saw on the first night of the war. You know, there was a lot of thought in this building that that first strike actually took out Saddam Hussein and at least one of his sons back then. Then there was a decreasing sense that that really did happen as time went on, and the videos popped up with some current mentions of the Apache helicopter being down. There was then a turn, if you will, that Saddam Hussein was still alive. Tonight there is increasing confidence that he was taken out in this strike. Again, it's going to be interesting to see how to prove that, because the descriptions that we're getting on the ground of this, the remains are pretty intense, if you will. A huge crater, dust. It's going to be interesting to see how the U.S. confirms that indeed he is dead.
All right, Brett, if you can stand by, go get us some more information and come back to us as we continue to follow this breaking news story. And joining me now in Washington, retired Marine Lieutenant Colonel Bill Cowan, retired Army Major General Bob Scales, and retired Air Force Lieutenant General Tom McInerney. General McInerney, extraordinary news tonight.
Yes, it is, Greta, and I think a lot of it has to do with the way we've organized over there. I was talking to you earlier about the urban close air support, in which we have divided the city into two down through the Tigris River, and we have an airborne forward air controller there 24/7. And nobody can drop in that restricted operating zone, they call it a RAS, unless the forward air controller clears them. But they have there, they've got airplanes stacked up there with all kinds of different weapons. They've got big bombs, 5,000-pounders. They've got little bombs, 500-pounders, even without high explosives, or just got concrete. So they have a menu of weapons to minimize the collateral damage.
And in this case, the bunker buster, 4 2,000-pound bunker busters.
5,000.
We're getting two reports. One is 5,000, one is 2,000. We'll have to get that confirmed. But General Scales, enormous amount of.
You know, it's interesting that this was his greatest fear. His greatest fear was that he would lose his trappings of leadership, that he would lose the trust of the ruling elite, and the ruling elite would eventually turn on him. Who would have ever thought that instead of one of his Republican guards attacking him with a pistol, that they would turn, presumably, to some special operations outfit on the ground and say, he's in that building, call a bomb.
Unless if the special operations have been tracking him for a long time. They've been there at least since October. Rita reports at least since June. I mean, this may have been completely independent.
Could have been.
It may be extraordinary work the special operations have done on the ground.
Could have been. Well, clearly, I mean, in order to mark the target, you'd need the special ops would have to be involved somewhere along the chain. But I just think this is a remarkable event, and once his death is verified, it's going to change the whole complexion of what's about to happen next.
And we're going to continue to get more information. Brett Beers over at the Pentagon, Rita Cosby in New York, and Carl Cameron here in Washington as we track down more details on this very significant night. Breaking news: it may be that Saddam Hussein and his two sons are dead. Colonel Cowan, special ops. How important is special ops in this operation?
Big time, I think, Greta. I think our special ops guys, and Rita talked a little bit about this Jaguar communication system. Our special ops guys have probably been inside Baghdad for some time now, putting in some signals intelligence collection capabilities that we didn't have before. Some low-level communications that we're not able to capture from satellites or aircraft flying over high overhead. You got to get down closer to the ground to catch some of this stuff. We've had these teams take some of that equipment in. And we're also able to do some direction finding inside. I would suggest we've probably been monitoring his communications for a while. And when he talks about 123 Elm Street, he uses some particular code. We've probably heard that code a couple times. We did a real quick transformation of where he was to getting those coordinates, GPS coordinates, from that exact position into some munitions from up above. So we probably already had the coordinates of that place, and maybe some place he's visited or some place he's talked about. In that code we've broken. Just a lot of things all coming together here at one time to make this work.
General McInerney, obviously very early on in the story, we still don't know. Brett reports that the Pentagon says it is now reduced to dust, and it'll be quite some time whether we know if indeed it is Saddam and his two sons. But what is your theory as to how this happened?
Well, General Scales and Colonel Cowan mentioned a number of them, but let me put it this way. We have a huge amount of intelligence going on there right now with special ops, with drones overhead, with signals intelligence. We call it the all source.
When you say signals intelligence, bring our viewers, explain this to our viewers.
Well, Greta was talking about the Jaguar system and telephone systems and any kind of matching system that we know that the command leadership uses. So we have a whole group of people in our country that work this issue, and but there are other intelligence sources. There are people that know where his bodyguard goes, and they're watching him, and they've been watching him a long time. In addition, I think the songbirds may be starting to talk now. Those people looking for an opportunity that are on his side to get amnesty and to do a deal. So there are a whole host of things that it could have been. But most important thing is, Greta, we had the resources sitting above and a menu to do it very quickly. There wasn't a delay. Now, we know he doesn't stay in these places long. He moves quickly. And I bet when history writes a story that you're going to find the time that it was accomplished was somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes.
All right, if you can stand by, all of you, Brett Baer has more information from the Pentagon. Brett?
Hi, Greta. We're getting more clarification now of when this bombing happened. And we erroneously put up that nighttime video of that strike. That was another strike that happened. This bombing, this target of opportunity, was taken out during the day, 2 p.m. Baghdad time. The intelligence, we're told, developed in the morning, and the strike happened at 2 p.m., 2 in the afternoon, essentially. Now, this may coincide with the information about a significant bombing in a residential area. The Iraqis called it an apartment complex where many civilians were killed. We heard that from Abu Dhabi TV. We'll work on getting some of that video because as you look at it, it is a huge crater there. We can tell you that this was a daytime strike with one B-1 bomber that was up as a part of this urban combat air support, essentially hovering, if you will, and General McInerney can tell more about this, but 24/7 as a part of this air combat support, providing cover for the troops. This target of opportunity, we're told, happened based on time-sensitive intelligence. It was developed in the morning, and then the B-1 dropped 4 bunker buster bombs on this building. Now, some describe it as a house, others as a building. What we can tell you across the board is that only a crater remains there now, and whether Saddam Hussein and his son or both sons were inside is still unclear. It is the belief on U.S. intelligence officials that they were in there for a meeting when the strike was ordered.
Can you confirm, Brett, what size bomb this was, bunker buster bomb?
Yeah, there were 4 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs, and they were dropped from this B-1, the B-1 Lancer.
All right, Brett, if you can continue to get us some more information, you can come right back as soon as you have it. I'd appreciate it. General McInerney, the B-1 bomber, any reason why that is significant? That was chosen.
Well, it was in the stack, the urban close air support stack, and it was armed with the 2,000-pounders. Initial report came out, it was 5,000, which I was a little doubtful because the B-1 can carry 24 2,000-pound bombs. And so it was loaded up with probably a number of different mixtures, and it was in this stack that we talked about and could be called on right away.
What do you mean by stack? It was flying in the area, fully loaded with these munitions.
There are probably 10 airplanes overhead in what we call a stack, flying with different munitions. So if they wanted a laser-guided bomb, they could have used it. I think because the weather was bad is the reason they used a JDAM. Normally you would use a laser bomb. And so we have this menu, and this is 24/7 right now, and it's primarily designed to protect our own friendly forces that are in there, and but it also is for fleeting targets, time-sensitive targets, emerging targets, as they call them.
All right, the JDAM is great for bad weather. You've put the coordinates into it. Laser doesn't do well. A laser-guided bomb doesn't do well in bad weather. What would be the advantage doing laser over a JDAM anyway? I mean, JDAM has reduced this to dust pretty well.
Well, yeah, but laser is more accurate than a JDAM. A JDAM may be 8, 10, even 15 feet. A laser is going to be well within 2 or 3 feet, and when you want that penetration. But they're both very good. When you drop 4 of them, it doesn't matter if you're 15 or 20.
Indeed. In fact, dust is the term that Brett Baer has given us. Greg Palcott is standing by in Amman, Jordan. Greg?
Hey, Greta, we've been following this along with all of our various Fox reporters feeding some very solid information about this hit. What we can tell you from this end is that the Arab television networks are carrying this information along with the American television networks. They are quoting various news agencies. We are in the process of trying to reach Abu Dhabi television. As Brett Baer just mentioned, it could have been a daylight residential hit that this was all about, not that nighttime blast that we had originally thought could be connected with this situation. So again, as we speak, we are on the line reaching Abu Dhabi to try to get more information on what they know about this. And again, what I can tell you from here is that the Arab television networks are picking this up big time. It is being played with very, very a large amount of seriousness. Just a couple of background points that we can make from our years here in the region following Saddam Hussein. I mean, right now, the fact that he would be meeting, some might say, well, why would he be meeting with his two sons and his intelligence top figures? If that indeed happened in one place, wouldn't that be an obvious target? Well, possibly, except it's probably about the only secure way that they can talk to each other now. They must be very, very careful about communicating in any other way. Telephone, satellite phone, email, whatever. So an actual physical gathering, although that might sound a little bit crude, is actually quite plausible. Also, why a residential area? Why not a government building? Well, we know after spending all of our time in Baghdad in the last few weeks, these government buildings aren't used anymore. The office buildings are not used anymore. The palaces are not used anymore for any kind of formal meetings of certainly of leadership, intelligence, Saddam Hussein, for sure, that in fact that they would choose a residential area, a residence to have this meeting makes absolute sense. And in fact, as he travels around Baghdad, we know that Saddam Hussein does not travel in any kind of a motorcade. A very low-key, a low-style, low-profile way of moving around is the way that he does it, and we can see him moving into a residential area. I mean, it is said at times that he's traveled around, at least this was how it was described back in the 1991 Gulf War, he traveled around in a Volkswagen. So absolutely a very low-key approach is how they would move on this. So the fact that a group was gathering makes sense. The fact that it was in a residential area makes sense. And the fact that it was not a meeting in a government building or a palace, and we've been searching these palaces, of course. Coalition forces have been searching these palaces, of course, for the last several days or more, and coming up empty. That is a good pointer, too, to underscore the plausibility that this could be a building where, in fact, Saddam Hussein and his sons and his other intelligence leaders could have been meeting. Again, we have to qualify everything on this, Greta. We don't know for sure that, in fact, they were there. We don't know for sure, in fact, that they were killed. But one other point I might add, too, Greta, we have been seeing these groupings allegedly almost every day as we monitor Rocky State Television. If you are to believe that these videotapes are made on the days that they are broadcast, then, in fact, we are seeing the gatherings. The latest videotape that we saw today had Saddam Hussein meeting with Karzai, and Karzai, of course, a very important figure, not only the heir apparent son, but also the figure in charge with the defense of Baghdad and the defense of the central area. We saw that meeting today with him, also with Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz and a few other figures. So today, again, there's no validity to these, no way to confirm that the videotapes we see each day are made on that day, but we did see a meeting that would have a composition quite similar to the grouping that is being described in the description of this gathering tonight. That is what we're hearing right now, Greta, and that's what we can add. And as we say, we're working the phones to get you more information. Back to you.
Great. Appreciate it. Greg Palcott live in Amman. And of course, if you're just joining us, Saddam and two of his sons may have been in a residential area that was bombed today by coalition forces. 4 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs were dropped in a residential area, which now all that remains is a crater filled with dust. Brett Baer is reporting from the Pentagon, and we'll go back to Brett when he has more information as breaking news. But first, joining me is Dr. Ghazi George, who's an exiled scientist for the Iraqi Atomic Energy Commission. Welcome, sir.
Hi, Greta.
Ghazi, you know or knew Saddam Hussein. Your thoughts tonight as we follow this breaking news story?
Yes, I had met Saddam Hussein when he was in charge of Atomic Energy Commission, and while watching or listening to your story, I had a suggestion mainly to identify Saddam Hussein. He always had one dentist and he always had one doctor for the whole family. He never trusted anybody else. And I think if anything would be salvaged from any human body with those bombs will be the teeth. And if they find any teeth belonging to his sons in there, that is definitely Saddam Hussein with them and not a double.
Ghazi, you were sentenced to death by Saddam Hussein. You also worked for him. Do you have any information about this residential area? I mean, can you give us any background, how far it is from the presidential palaces, whether it's likely to have a sophisticated bunker system underneath it?
I do not know from what I've seen where the bunker is. However, a lot of his bunkers were built by the Germans, recently, and they were designed to withstand a lot of bombing. But I doubt if they could withstand the big bombs that they dropped on him today.
Ghazi, you helped Saddam Hussein hide weapons. What did you help him hide?
Well, in 1981, prior to the bombing of the Iraqi reactor by the Israeli bombs, we were notified by security that we had to remove the uranium, the enriched uranium, from the reactor core into a safe location, which was a swimming pool, mainly to protect the uranium from the bombs. And we moved that into that location. To be told afterwards, about a week after the bombing, which was very successful. In fact, the reactor was blown up to pieces, that Saddam Hussein wanted to simulate a uranium spill in the area to write off the uranium, approximately 40 pounds of highly enriched uranium, to tell the inspectors that the uranium was gone or buried in the core.
Ghazi, just hold on for 1 second and remind the viewers that we are going to go back to the Pentagon as soon as Brett Baer has more information on this breaking news story about Saddam Hussein and his two sons who may be dead tonight as a result of coalition bombing. Ghazi, why were you sentenced to death by Saddam Hussein?
After I left, I escaped from Iraq after the Israeli bombing of the nuclear reactor, and after I was asked to fake the inspection, the uranium spill, and fool the United Nations and the International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors. In fact, they accepted the whole story and they left and they stamped the paperwork that they lost the uranium. After I left, Saddam Hussein tried to get me back. He tried to kidnap my children in order to force me to go back to Iraq. And when that failed, he accused me of being an Israeli spy and that I caused the bombing of the reactor, and I was sentenced to death.
How do you describe him? I mean, you actually knew him.
Yes, the first time I met him, it was in 1976, and Saddam Hussein was a very confident person. He has penetrating eyes, very respectable person. He was youthful, and in fact, he gained the respect of many people, including the West at that time, because he was fighting. In fact, a few years later, he fought Khomeini, and the West was with him. However, as the years passed by, Saddam Hussein became really a monster. I witnessed firsthand some of his torture chambers, that he used to use radioactive material in order to poison and irradiate prisoners. In addition to that, I had witnessed him faking the spill for the reactor bombing and telling the inspectors that we lost the uranium while he was hiding it to make his bombs out of that uranium. So Saddam Hussein was very smart, and I'll tell you what, for the past 11 years he had fooled the United Nations inspectors and fooled the world, in fact, except when the president had mentioned and insisted that Saddam Hussein had the weapons of mass destruction, and we're seeing the evidence these days.
Have you seen some of the videotape of Saddam that we played on American television that's from Iraqi television, in which Saddam supposedly is speaking? Some of the recent tape?
I watched the immediate one after the initial bombing, the first bombing, and definitely that person was not Saddam Hussein. If you notice that Saddam Hussein, the doubles of Saddam Hussein, never appear on video with his sons. His sons, in many ways, are like Saddam. They resent anybody else but themselves. And this is what I mentioned earlier in this video. If one finds out that his sons were in the bunker that was destroyed today, Saddam Hussein was with them, definitely.
Do you have any theory why he didn't flee? I mean, if he's just a short distance from the presidential palaces, the coalition has rolled over the Republican Guard. They've got at least one palace. Do you have any thought on why he didn't run?
Yeah, you see, Saddam Hussein always, and I think Mr. Speaker really described him really well. He always pictures himself as Saladin, who is the guy who won the battle against the Crusaders. Saddam Hussein would rather die because if he is caught by the Americans, he's going to be humiliated if he's caught alive, and he's going to be taken to court as a war criminal. On the other hand, if he's caught by his own people, they're going to rip him apart because a lot of people hate him in there, and he's hurt and killed many, many people there.
Ghazi, yeah, go ahead, I'm sorry.
This is what I say. I think and I do believe that he would rather die rather than get captured.
Ghazi, thank you very much for joining us. To remind the viewers who are just tuning in that Saddam Hussein and his two sons may have been in a residential area tonight or to this afternoon Baghdad time that was bombed by coalition forces, leaving a huge crater and dust, if anything at all else besides that. Brett Baer has been reporting on this. He's at the Pentagon. We're going to check in with Brett in a few moments. General Scales, extraordinary the bombing that's done on such short notice, isn't it?
I think it's amazing. It just shows you how far, as Tom talks about, this air-ground team has come. The ability of special operating forces and coalition forces to strike immediately from the air. If you go back to the first Gulf War, the time interval from request to delivery was measured in minutes, sometimes in hours. Here, this thing must have been, Tom, this must have been in what, minutes probably, from the time that he was located, his position was verified, SOF on the ground managed to get a latitude and longitude punched into their computers. Next thing you know, you got a B-1 dropping, what, 4 bunker-busting bombs.
2,000-pound.
2,000-pound bunker-busting bombs. And given the fact that this man moves about all the time and is constantly mobile, to be able to catch him in a house like that is probably one of the most remarkable testimonials I've ever seen to the fact that the air and the ground team in our military has really come together over the last few years.
Colonel Cowan, now we're going to have a big problem trying to identify if Saddam and his two sons were in that building. What do we do?
Well, I was thinking about this, Greta. Looks like we're going to be trying to do DNA on dust, according to what we're hearing about what's left there. Going to be hard to tell. If it's as badly destroyed as it's indicated, we may not find anything. And incidentally, Greta, let me go to the map real quickly if I can. I think I know where this happened, and I can at least show our viewers what we have here. Just a reminder, here's the airport, and our troops have come up here to the presidential palace area, and it appears that he may have been struck right in here, which is barely a mile or a mile and a half away. So in the context of how close he was to us, that's pretty interesting. In fact, as the speaker mentioned, he may not really have known how well our forces were doing in all the places that we actually were inside that city.
You know, General McInerney, one theory could be, as we do exercise some caution to make sure, I mean, it's going to be a while if we know this is true, but if he's that clever, maybe he had a body double and set us off on a wild goose chase, but he hasn't shown any cleverness, he hasn't been clever in this whole war.
Well, it could very well be, and I don't think you'll find Secretary Rumsfeld being euphoric on it because he's a very pragmatic, takes a pessimistic view, doesn't try to oversell the issue, and frankly, I'm right there too. I'd want to be euphoric, but he's a very slippery chap. He's had 9 lives at least. Whether this was his 10th one or not, we just have to wait and see. Now, they've got a lot of different sources they're working on. And I'm a little surprised that this late he's still around there, because I thought he
You mean that close to that close downtown Baghdad?
Yes, I thought he might have been heading for Syria by now. But again, you don't know. He's very nervous about people around him because they say they're starting to become songbirds, and they're going to let the word out. and he doesn't trust anybody, and he shouldn't trust anybody.
General Scales, you know, we always think of them sort of in terms of your own mind. I mean, I would have been out of there by now, but he's a crazy man. He's a cruel man, and we can't really think of him through our own, what we think would be rational to get out of there.
You know, everybody talks about his Islamic roots. I have a more of an image of Hitler or Stalin. You know, the idea that Hitler was in his bunker on the, whatever it was, the 25th of April 1945, and he was determined to die in that bunker because of this messianic.
But they fought back. I mean, there's been virtually no resistance to this. I mean, there's been horrible sniping, and we've had you know, death on the coalitions, but this has not been a very forceful military.
No, but I'm talking about what Saddam thinks about himself. This sort of messianic image he has of himself, and the fact that he still, even if he loses the war and he's humiliated, I still think in his own mind he has won simply because he's eluded capture. I mean, that's just the sort of mind we're talking about, sort of the mind of Hitler.
Let me stop you for a second. The video that we're now looking at, we think maybe, and I underline maybe the bombing earlier today in that residential area where Saddam and his two sons may have been. We're not positive about this video. It's clearly a video of something is bombed out, but as we get more details, of course, we'll bring it to you. Carl Cameron is standing by. Carl?
Hi, Greta. Well, we're getting a little bit more information, and if that video is of the site, beneath that rubble, we're told, would be something like a restaurant. U.S. government officials saying that part of the intelligence that led them to today's attack, a B-1 dropping 3 massive 2,000-pound JDAMs on this target of Iraqi leadership opportunity, was apparently a restaurant, or what one source described as some sort of a dining facility in which on the ground human intelligence, which is to say somebody tipped off U.S. government officials that there were as many as 50 or 60 Ba'ath Party leaders and Iraqi military officials planning to have a fairly high-level meeting about ongoing intelligence strategies. Now, what exactly the topic of that discussion was is open to a great deal of conjecture. A senior Bush administration official reached tonight in Washington is striking a somewhat more cautious tone to all of this, saying that they just don't know who was in that meeting. The way we've been able to piece together the chronology of what happened today, the U.S. government got some information that this meeting was to happen, and as we've reported repeatedly, it was time-sensitive information, and there was an indication from a senior Bush administration official just a short time ago that these individuals gathered at this restaurant or dining facility intended to be there for some time. Now, we know from Brett Baer's reporting that the bombs dropped around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, so it may have been something of a luncheon meeting. The Bush administration official source that we spoke with cautioned that they just do not know at this point who exactly was in the building when the JDAMs hit it. But we know that the intelligence going in has been described as very reliable, a high degree of confidence in the quality of this intelligence before the strike actually occurred. It did not take long. There's tremendous communications on the ground right now from the moment this intelligence information was gathered by one agency of the government and then passed through to CENTCOM, and they got that B-1 to drop the JDAM. A very short period of time actually passed. So there is a great deal of optimism, according to a senior Bush administration official in Washington tonight, that they may have actually targeted the officials and been able to take out Saddam Hussein and his sons. But there is this caution. They do not know whether or not Saddam Hussein and his sons were in the building when the bombs actually hit it. But the intelligence prior to that suggested that he may have been there and that there was and was destroyed a very senior meeting of Ba'ath Party and military officials tonight at that location.
Carl, thank you. We're going to go to New York. Rita Cosby standing by with more information. Rita?
Well, Greta, intelligence sources and also other U.S. officials are telling me, just to add a couple things to what Carl was saying, I am told, again, also as Carl was saying about a restaurant, but I'm told that they were probably not in the dining area at the time, that it was a location that had a restaurant attached to it, and it was either a house behind the restaurant or sort of part of it was a restaurant, part of it was not, but that they were probably not in the dining area at the time, and it's in a neighborhood, sort of a neighborhood area of Baghdad. But it was actually sort of in the house structure of the facility. Also, just to give you an idea of the timing, I am told that around 1 p.m. Baghdad time, they got a tip. They got some human intelligence pointing to that he was going to this location, along with some other Ba'ath Party leaders. I'm told that there may have been a dozen to 20 or 30. I know Carl was saying 50. There may actually be more, but some intelligence was pointing that there was at least a dozen officials going into this structure. So they got one tip around 1 p.m. Eastern time. Then they got a second human intelligence tip from another special ops ops officer shortly after that. Then they were able to pick up something from the sky, get some eavesdropping, and again, going back to that Jaguar, that sort of encrypted system that they were able to tap into that Saddam Hussein has been using, they were able to get another source, and then they got another ground source after that, and then they decided within minutes of that that confirmation that they would do the strike. And officials I am talking to, Greta, again, are saying, you know, they cannot be for sure. They did see him go in. They believe it was Saddam Hussein, not one of his doubles. They did not see him leave, and at this point saying there's a good chance, and of course doing a lot of tests right now to get a clear confirmation.
All right, we continue to follow this breaking news story. Saddam and his two sons may have been bombed today by coalition troops. Fox is going to continue to follow the story. We have Brett Baer at the Pentagon, reporters here in D.C., military experts and reporters live all around the world. I'm going to turn this over to John Gibson, who's going to take over for our breaking news coverage. John?
Thanks a lot, Greta. Hi, everybody. I'm John Gibson. We start our live coverage tonight at the Pentagon with Brett Baer in just a moment. Let me recap what we know at this time. Just over a few hours ago, a B-1 bomber dropped 4 2,000-pound JDAM bombs on a certain location in Baghdad where it was believed that Saddam Hussein, his two sons, and a number of Ba'ath Party officials were gathered at a restaurant. We have some video of what we think was this is video of a JDAM bomb, but the bombing that occurred that may have gotten Saddam Hussein was in the daytime. This is just illustrative of the kind of explosive power of one of these bunker buster bombs, and there were 4 of them dropped on this place where they believe that Saddam Hussein and his sons and a group of Ba'ath Party officials and intelligence and security officials were gathering to plot their next move. U.S. officials, as you've heard Carl Cameron report, are not certain they got Saddam Hussein. They did get the building. They did get a lot of people who were in the building, but they do not know at this moment if Saddam Hussein was actually struck. Brett Baer at the Pentagon joins us now. Brett, what can you tell us?
Hi, John. This strike developed after some intelligence on the ground. According to U.S. officials, talking to myself and Rita Cosby, Carl Cameron across the board, saying that there was human intel involved here, believed to be that Saddam Hussein and his sons, at least one of them, in this meeting of Ba'ath Party members at a facility in residential Baghdad, essentially a suburb. The intelligence, we're told, developed in the early afternoon. The bombing itself happened at 2 in the afternoon, Baghdad time, in broad daylight. A B-1 bomber was used. It was part of the urban combat air support that was up above Baghdad. This has been up 24/7 for the last day and a half now, providing protection for troops and also targets of opportunity on the ground. Now, you're looking at video of a strike, the battle damage assessment and the aftermath of a strike earlier today in a residential area. We do not know, and I emphasize, we senior defense officials and here at Fox do not know that that is the video of this strike. But we can tell you that what we're being told is that senior defense officials say what is remaining on the ground is essentially a huge crater. One official told me, Brett, what is left there is essentially dust. 4 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs were dropped from this B-1 and took out this facility. Anyone inside, according to senior defense officials, did not make it out alive. Now, whether Saddam Hussein and his two sons were inside is still unclear, hasn't been definitively proven, but there is a growing sense of optimism here at the Pentagon and across the administration that, in fact, there were senior leaders, possibly Saddam Hussein himself, in that building at the time of this strike.
Brett, how are they going to figure out if he was?
That's interesting. There will be U.S. troops on the ground, we are told, to check out this site. Now it has been, it'll be a day in about, it'll be a day in about 8 hours since the strike, and we will see, as at first light here in Baghdad, whether we will see U.S. troops in this particular area. Now, I understand that it is to the north and east on that side of Baghdad where this particular building is, and again, that video that we saw earlier, we're not sure that that matches up with that description. But
Brett, let me,
they're going to get people on the ground.
Brett, let me just tell you, we got a call, our Mansour
Mansour Ijaz, who is a Fox News intelligence analyst, is coming into the studio a little later, but he has made a call, and from an intelligence service in the Mideast that he has contacts with, he has gleaned this information. The intelligence service he talked to, and I'm reading this off the computer, says that Saddam and his sons and this group were gathered at this restaurant in order to make final plans to get out of town. They thought that this would be the last night before the U.S. started hunting them down. The U.S., after all, had just taken up camp inside Baghdad. Also, Mr. Mansour tells us Qusay and Uday would never be in the same room together otherwise, if it wasn't so important. One of the people who was supposed to be in the meeting evidently sold them out, and that is where the intelligence came from to target that particular location. Brett, it's from Mansour. His sources are usually pretty good. What do you make of it?
Well, I think that's a definite possibility. Officials are telling us, a number of my colleagues, similar details. Rita Cosby has reported some of that already, that a number of U.S. officials said that this meeting was essentially a get-out-of-town meeting for top leaders, including Saddam Hussein and his sons. Here at the Pentagon, they're not getting into that detail on intelligence. I can tell you that other U.S. officials have told us that this target came up very quickly after a number of sources on the ground essentially pinpointed where this meeting was happening. They knew it was going on. They called in the strike right away, and it happened about 1 hour after the initial intelligence, the tip, developed on the ground. What remains, we'll have to see at first daylight whether there will be a lot of troops over in that particular area, but I can tell you that it was described to me as a huge crater. Now, this particular facility, I'm told, had an underground bunker complex to it as well. Rita Cosby has reported that her sources say that they believe the meeting was happening in another part of the building, not in the underground, but I can tell you 4 bunker buster bombs, the 2,000-pound version, would essentially take out anything in and around that area.
Okay, Brett Baer, I know you need to go gather some more of information for us, so please do. Meanwhile, if Saddam was killed by this big blast we've been talking about, is this war any closer to an end? Let's ask Fox News military analyst Lieutenant General Tom McInerney in Washington and Lieutenant Colonel Fred Peterson with me in New York. He's the military affairs editor for WorldTribune.com. General McInerney, obviously this is a very big deal. If this is the case, is it your judgment it would be the end of the war?
No, John, there's still remnants to fight, but it's certainly going to expedite things. I don't see a formal handover, a formal surrender necessarily as we would normally do. Let me take you and show you in the screenwriter exactly what I think the situation is and what happened, if you may. On the screenwriter here, I've got in red is where our friendly forces are and the excursion we went in, and in the white right here, that little dot right there, is where I believe that restaurant was. We have this lodgement that you see in red as well there, right there, and then we have a lodgement right here with the Marines in this area. So we're building up these lodgements, and of course then we have the airport lodgement. Now above what you see is we've got, and what enabled us to do this so quickly is we've got a what we call urban close air support. And they're A-10s or F-15s, F-16s, F-14s, F-18s, 24/7. We have airplanes with a forward air controller in both the west and the east side. And we have airplanes in what they call the stack that are sitting above. In this case, it's a B-2, could have been a B-1. They've got a menu of airplanes with different kind of weapons, John, from 2,000-pound bunker busters to 500-pound bombs with just concrete in them. So we have minimized our collateral damage on targets. We also have up there, we've got the Global Hawk and the Predator. So we have this 24-hour stare of our intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. This whole city now is a separate restricted operating zone, and the only way you can drop anything in there is go through one of those airborne forward air controllers, either on the east side or the west side. This was developed at Nellis Air Force Base 6 months ago, and it is proving to be if in fact we did get Saddam, a very powerful concept of operations.
General, hang on for just a second. Here in the studio with me, Fred Peterson, who is a retired lieutenant colonel from the Marines and writes about these matters with worldtribune.com. Fred, you have some interesting information from your sources, and that was that this restaurant is in a neighborhood called the Mansour neighborhood.
Exactly, a Mansour neighborhood. However, it was not a residential district. This is a commercial district. It is specifically the Al-Sa restaurant within the commercial district within
Why would
the
Saddam
Mansour
Hussein
neighborhood.
be there?
Saddam Hussein would be there because there is no government building or no government-owned facility in Baghdad that was safe. Each one was a marked target. It was considered by the leadership that the Allies would not bomb a commercial neighborhood, and in fact they have really accepted our own
assurances that we wouldn't bomb civilians.
Civilians are off target, as indeed they are. There were 30 members, as our sources have it, of the Ba'ath Party, of IIS or the Mukhabarat, their intelligence service, and the senior leadership of the Ba'ath Party that was located here, and indeed they were, according to our best sources, plotting their exit strategy. It appears that they intended to go to Tikrit.
Is this the neighborhood where Saddam Hussein was walking around?
Indeed it was. It was the same neighborhood that you see in the picture. Our sources from Washington tell us, and very good sources, U.S. government, that they confirmed the identity of Saddam Hussein at that time. And you can see in that clip smoke rising in the background, which was able to help us pinpoint the location of him with great specificity. Our ground assets were then able to follow him through a number of technical
I must
means.
tell you, Fred, a lot of people have said this tape was not made recently. It appears it was made a month or so ago when it was still a bit cooler. This was not a contemporary tape. Your sources think it was?
We had, and a quote-unquote, Friday's tape was Saddam, and that is from a U.S. government official in Washington.
You know, General McInerney, there's a certain sense that Fred's information makes, and that is that Saddam Hussein knew your colleagues in the Pentagon and your colleagues in the bombing campaign were not going to purposely bomb civilian neighborhoods. He probably had a free walk around there.
Sorry we changed our rules, John. The fact is that anywhere he is, and we've been looking for him, he's going to be a target. Now, I'm not sure. I kind of leaned what you said. That was a 90-some degree day, and it doesn't look it's 90-some degrees out there that day. But be that as it may, we've got a lot of sources looking. We'll find out soon. The fact is we had a very quick response on this emerging target, and it was due to the urban close air support setup that we had there and the way we had airplanes available with a different menu of weapons to do this. We do need a lot of verification, John. I don't want to get too euphoric on this, but we may see as of tomorrow, if we got the right people, that maybe some people will start talking to us about a surrender or changing the conditions.
General McInerney and Fred Peterson, stand by for just a second. Let's go back to Rita Cosby. Of course, the story of the hour is a leadership target in Baghdad hit, and Saddam Hussein could have been there if he was. He certainly would be very unlikely to have survived it. Rita, what's the latest?
Well, John, I can tell you my intelligence sources are giving me some details as to sort of how quick of a reaction time the U.S. had. Also, I wanted to supplement what we were just talking with the general and some of the others about the videotape. My intelligence sources were saying the same thing, that videotape was Saddam Hussein. They believed it was shot recently. They can't confirm that it was shot that day, but the video they do believe may have been shot that day. They said it was probably shot in the early morning hours because the people, the way they were dressed in the leather coats, he had a turtleneck on. But they were saying to me all along that they believed Saddam Hussein was alive. In fact, I've been reporting that since the very beginning. And another interesting detail, and this is something I was reporting the last hour that we broke, that apparently they have been able to track down Saddam Hussein since the very beginning of this war pretty clearly, much more than we have ever known, because of a system that he was carrying. It's called a Jaguar system. It's something that the Brits actually sold to Saddam and his sons. And it is a voice encryption system which uses cell phone technology. And it was sold to the Iraqis during the Iran-Iraq War many years ago, when, of course, we were on the side of Iraq at that point. The Brits basically told Saddam and his people there's no way it's going to be impossible to encrypt this. It's based on sort of a hopping system. It hops a number of different points. It's very complicated, but it's very difficult to be able to break that code. They said it's impossible, is what they told Saddam. Well, since then, they've gotten some new technology that they shared with the U.S., being able to essentially break that code. And the U.S. was able to break that code and basically be able to track him. The other way it also was helpful to them is that apparently his doubles were not using this piece of technology, that only Saddam, his sons, and some of his key leaders. So they've been able to basically eavesdrop and get a good sense of what his group has been talking about and a bit of his movements, to the point where we think we have been close to getting Saddam Hussein, I've been told from a couple sources, 3 or 4 times in the last few weeks. As far as tonight, about 1 p.m. Baghdad time, one person on the ground, a special ops officer, I am told, gave some critical piece of technology information, essentially saying, we know Saddam is going into this building, we understand he's heading there. Then they got some eavesdropping information, possibly from this Jaguar system, which they were able to intercept. And then they got some more human intelligence. I'm told that they got at least 3 pieces of human intelligence in addition to eavesdropping. And the combination of the things gave them sure intelligence, where they were able to basically, when they made a final confirmation within minutes, they had that B-1 bomber above, and they were able to drop those bunker buster bombs. Now, I am told, this is incredible, just the advanced technology that the U.S. has, that they were able to listen in. This meeting, I'm told, which involved at least anywhere from a dozen to maybe 20 or 30 Iraqi leaders, were at this location. I'm told it's a residence, like a house structure attached to a restaurant. I'm told that they were probably not in the restaurant section at the time, but it was either a house behind a restaurant or a house underneath the restaurant, like adjacent to, in this residential area, but that they were standing within 4 to 6 meters of each other. This is the kind of technology, and they were discussing how to get out of the city. A little too late, of course, to be talking about that, and that's apparently when the bombs came down. Now, my sources are saying, again, they saw them go in. They did not see them leave. They seem fairly confident, John, based on the tone that they're talking with me tonight, that there's a good chance they got them. But, of course, it's going to take a bit of time. And as we were just talking about, as I was just overhearing your other folks talking about, what they're going to have to look at now is physical evidence. Go to the site. Go see if they have remnants of him and his sons and these other Iraqi leaders. The other thing is communications. Remember, we were able to really eavesdrop to see if there's any communications amongst these leaders who they think were also there, amongst Saddam and others. Others may be talking about it. So there's a number of things they can do to try to get verification, but it could be some time. Back to you.
Osby, thank you very much. Let's go now to Amman, Jordan. Greg Palcott is standing by, where, of course, everybody is very interested in what may be the result of this American bombing today that could have taken out Saddam Hussein. We don't know, but they are hopeful. They believe leadership figures were in the building which was bombed. Greg Palcott, what do you got on your end?
John, we got bits and pieces here. One government source is saying that the area that was hit was the Mansour district. I can tell you a little bit about that. That is on the western side of Baghdad. That is an area we would describe as upper middle class. The homes there are villas. Interestingly enough, Mansour was the former neighborhood of Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz. His wife, as you know, he is Christian. His wife still attends a church in that area. The video that we were looking at that was shown on Abu Dhabi television, which some people, I know I heard Brett Baer mention this about 20 minutes ago, some people believe might illustrate the bombing target is a commercial building, and that would sink in with yet another bit of information that I know Rita Cosby has been talking about, and that is that a restaurant was the site of this bombing. What we can also say is what we saw today, and that is we saw Saddam Hussein in a videotape that was broadcast on state television. He was with one of his sons, Kuzai, that's the important son, that's the heir apparent, that's the one that was in charge of the defense of Baghdad, as well as the Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz and a few other officials. There's been another bit of information as I track all of our sources, not just here, but what we're giving across on Fox News, that perhaps there was only one son present and not both sons. That would sink in with the visual that we saw in this videotape. I must also say, although it's not clear how much this then moves this story forward, is that the video that we saw today of Saddam Hussein was clearly not in a government office, a building that we had ever seen before. Each one of these videos that we've been seeing the last week looks different, and this certainly looked in a very hunkered down locale, and the quality of the video was different. One or two other background pieces I can give you, John. Some people say, well, why are all these people gathering? Well, why aren't they doing it in ones and twos? Well, they have to meet, and now that the U.S. and coalition forces are in Baghdad, communication lines easily tapped, whether it's phone or computer or satellite. So, in fact, the very simple process of meeting together and exchanging information does make sense. So once again, this Mansour area, a very interesting, high-level governmental residential area. One last point I should mention, John, bizarrely enough, however, if it is indeed this Mansour area, you're about a half a mile from the presidential palace where the 3rd Infantry Division is now in place. Back to you.
Greg Palcott in Amman. Let's go now to Washington and Carl Cameron, who's been digging into the story on this possible strike, or definite strike, possibly on Saddam Hussein. Carl, what can you tell us?
John, well, we can tell you that a senior Bush administration official tonight does confirm that it was the Mansour neighborhood of suburban Baghdad. And whether that is the actual video, the scene is described by a variety of sources around Washington tonight as being a tremendous crater, very, very deep. But the administration, as well as other government officials, being very cautious tonight, saying that while there is a great deal of optimism and there was a fair amount of confidence in the intelligence information that Saddam Hussein, his sons, would be at this meeting of Ba'ath Party leadership and military leaders at this restaurant facility or the building adjacent to it, and that there is some ground intelligence that suggested that Saddam Hussein was actually seen going into the facility itself before the JDAMs were dropped on it. They didn't see anybody come out, and they cannot yet confirm that Saddam Hussein and his sons were there when the bombs fell and or were killed. Part of the reason for that caution is, as Mr. Palcott was just telling us a moment ago, Greg pointing out there's a lot of bunkers in Baghdad, and Saddam Hussein has made very effective use of them. Catacombs strewn throughout Baghdad. They had planned to have an underground subway system years ago, and it never got finished, and that's one of the things that Saddam Hussein has turned into his sort of subterranean command center. And it is entirely possible, in fact, there is some reason to suspect government officials now reviewing their records to find out if, in fact, this very building that was bombed today may not be very close to, if not, in fact, on top of the bunkers and that network of tunnels. Saddam Hussein has used these tunnels in the last 3 weeks to escape some decapitation attempts beyond that which actually started Operation Iraqi Freedom now almost 3 weeks ago. He has used them before. There have been a series of attack attempts on leadership targets since that first one at the beginning of the war. And our intelligence officials are saying that, in fact, it is believed that Saddam Hussein has made effective escape routes of them in the past, and that is one of the reasons for caution now. A senior Bush administration official in Washington tonight again saying there is a lot of growing confidence, but they are going to be cautious until such time as further assessments can be made. The other thing, in regard to the intelligence that led up to this, we are hearing over and over and over again.
Ever going to figure out if they got him? I mean, there's complete destruction there. If he was in the building, he'll be vapor, wouldn't he?
But that will be evidenced soon. The sheer lack of any command and control at this for the last couple of weeks. There have been a couple of times where Republican Guard units have actually moved like a military. They would launch some sort of a response attack and then actually move in tactics that appear to be directed by a military mind, as opposed to some of the random chaos and the Fedayeen types of guerrilla warfare attacks that we've seen. There have been some military responses that look like an army, from the Iraqis, although minimal in the last couple of weeks. It will be pretty obvious in the next day or so that if Saddam Hussein was hit. Now, the other thing is, specific to that video that we were looking at a short time ago that was the devastation in a residential area, it has already been suggested to me by one government official that had that video that you're seeing there, had Saddam Hussein and other Ba'ath Party and Iraqi military leaders under it, the level of urgency in the search might have been considerably higher than what we're seeing now. While they obviously, when they see a guy smoking a cigarette, he doesn't look like he's looking for his leader. And if it was believed that Saddam Hussein and his sons were buried underneath that, it's already been suggested by one government official that there isn't a lot of urgency in that search. I mean, they're there standing on a car, John. It looks like they're pretty fatalistic about it.
All right, Carl Cameron, appreciate it, Carl. I know you got a lot of sources, and if you go dig on them and come talk to me a little bit later, I appreciate it. Let's go now to Ambassador Dennis Ross, the former Special Middle East Coordinator and a Fox Foreign Affairs analyst. Dennis, let's just say that there is intelligence that is able to tell American authorities whether they did or did not get Saddam Hussein, and there is some way to be definitive about it. A, does that bring everything to an end, essentially? And B, how are we going to convince the world we actually got him?
John, I think you're actually putting your finger on what may be the best way to evaluate this. We may not have any way of knowing soon in terms of definitive proof, but there's another way to see it, and that is, I don't believe that if Saddam is dead, that for a period of longer than, say, 2 days, you're going to see resistance continue. Indeed, what you may well see is those who are prepared to sue for peace, those who are prepared to say it's time to save Baghdad. And from that standpoint, if he's dead, I would expect that whoever is left is going to look for ways to separate themselves from his legacy and certainly, perhaps, approach us. So I think one of the best ways to determine whether or not this is true is to see what happens in the next day or two. If, in fact, you don't see that, if there is continuing resistance, then I would say he probably was not killed in this. If we do see what amounts to an imminent collapse, then it's a pretty clear indication that those around or those who are in the position to know now believe that he's also gone. You
know, Dennis, we live in hope. I mean, if this guy is dead, the war ends early, and everybody wants that. But this is a guy who spent 2.5 minutes at his own son's wedding rather than hang around a crowd, who's been traveling underground for a long time. And to suddenly come above ground into a restaurant in other words, out of a bunker, protected, right. It seems a little illogical to me. From your experience with these people, why would he do that?
Well, one possibility is that he didn't have any other way to be communicating. That's one of the points that has been raised. I tend to be a little bit more dubious. This is a guy who has lived in the shadows. This is a guy who always focuses on how he can survive. Why right now would he come together with as many as 50 people? This would be a point also for him not to do it, not only because he wouldn't want to create such a convenient target, but at this point he may not be so trusting of a large number of people. I have a hard time believing that he would be in any setting that is really larger than about 10. If we're talking about a number significantly larger, that doesn't seem to make much sense. It doesn't seem to fit his pattern. And it's also conceivable that he might be very big into disinformation right now, trying to create impressions that he's one place when in fact he's someplace else.
Yeah, Dennis, stand by a second. Let's go back to the Pentagon. Brett Baer is there with some new information about that video we've been looking at.